Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
Rick Revelle has been encouraging me to finish my book. He's on his fourth, and I'm sort of trying to get through my first. But I've read his most recent one, the one he'll be speaking on today, Algonquin Sunset. It starts out with I am Algonquin, which explains everything. I read the third one, but I fell into all the characters because truly you can't put it down once you pick it up. You get into the dialect of what's being spoken and a way of life from hundreds of years ago and how it's relevant today. Yeah, I can't really speak much more on that. I'm amateur. The professional is going to take over here. So welcome, everyone. Rick Revelle.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Is this working?
Yep.
Okay. As Brian said, I'm an author. My books, I've been pretty lucky. I got published when I was 60 years old. It's sugar at the end of my life. I've written 3 books since then. My books are used in school boards across Canada. I've been lucky. I've been go to visit a lot of schools and talk at schools. I'm an Amawini person, which is an Algonquin person. Proper name for us, Amawini. That's the Algonquin people. Welcome you to, this is the land of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, with the Iroquois and the Algonquins and the Ojibwe and the Potawatomis and the Ottawa. This Wolfe Island would have been used I write about the 1300s. My books are historical fiction. Nonfiction as far as of all the culture that I talk about and every place that I talk about you can visit. All these maps here. I've been to every museum from Newfoundland to Winnipeg and down to South Dakota. So if you read all 3 of my books, you have traveled from Newfoundland to South Dakota. And the places that you go to, you can see. My books tend to be a little bit violent in spots, but that's indicative of the era. And I always start out, when I go to schools, I always start off with a little welcoming song. Hey, hey, hey. So that's just a little Anishinaabe welcoming song. I have a cousin, she travels around to schools all the time with the grandmother's drumming group. Her name is, her name slips my memory. Oh my goodness gracious. But she goes around the schools a lot. She's great. She's a great storyteller, so she taught me that song. So if any time you have questions, ask them. I have lots of things to get to and lots of things to talk about. So everything here is involved in my stories. The maps, I usually don't bring this many maps when I go to schools because I have about an hour to talk, and I usually just talk about one book. I want to start with Algonquin. There's a story in it that talks about a legend. In all 3 of my books, there's important legend people that I humanize. In my first book, there's a Mijibouju and the Trickster Rabbit. Now, how many have ever been to Mazenau Park? Have you ever seen the pictographs there? Yes. Okay. Have you ever seen Mijibouju? He looks like a little dragon on the rocks. He's got a tail and things sticking up. And he's in my book. He's a fabulous underwater night panther. His earthly form is this guy right here. If you ever want to go to Napanee High School and see what he looks like as he leaves the water into this earthly form, a good friend of mine, Karen Randall, was responsible for making a medicine wheel and including one of my characters in the library. It's a huge library, a circular library. Kirk Brandt and Morris Blanchard, Onagante from Kingston, and a settler, Maureen Walton. They created these pictures along with the school children, grade 11 and 12. It's a magnificent mural all around the library. In the second book, you'll find out about Glooscap. Have anybody ever been to Nova Scotia? Have you been outside the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center in Truro, the 40-foot statue of Glooscap? So he's in the second book, and anybody ever been to Thunder Bay? The Sleeping Giant. Nanabujo. So they're incorporated in my story. So they're stories of legends, but everything it follows a family of Mahingan and his 4 brothers and the children that they have, and it goes from about 1305, 1310 to my last book takes place about 1350, and right now I'm out in the prairies, and that'll be the last book. It follows the Anishinaabe as they make their travels from Nova Scotia to Alberta. And they drew the pictographs, so I'm sure you've heard about the pictographs on the way out, and that was part of their journey. They were told by the 7 prophets that there was a big bad storm coming, and that they had to leave there, and it turned out to be the Europeans. And 6 of the prophets, one of the prophets went back into the ocean, and they guided them to the west. And they ended up in Sault Ste. Marie, and their main they ended up over here. You can't see the island. They're called Christian Islands, but and over there, and that's where, yeah. And the Anishinaabe, that's the Ojibwe, and they're called the 3 Fires, and the Sioux at that time were woodland natives. They were never prairie. And once the French came in the 1600s and they started trading with the Ojibwe and the Potawatomi and the Ottawa, they got guns and they drove the Sioux out into the prairies. And that was before the horse era. And at the time of the prairies, who was out in the prairies was a Rick-a-raw. And if you ever seen the movie The Reverend, did you see the movie The Reverend? That's the only movie I've ever seen where they talk about the Rick-a-raw and the Ree. And at that time, they were about 30,000 strong. The white people hadn't come to the prairies till about after Lewis and Clark. So the Rick-a-raw lived in forts with moats. And they were one of the first horse cultures out there, and they were strong. And the Sioux were caught in between, and they couldn't move out there until the Rick-a-raw first contact with whites, and 25,000 of them died with smallpox, and then the rest, and then there was no buffer for them, and the Sioux moved out, and the Ojibwa pushed them out. So that's just kind of a short history of them. In the 1300s, there was three main, you can say armies, but 3 main strong nations. The Haudenosaunee, who lived south of Lake Ontario, the Iroquois, the 5 Nations. Tuscaroras came later when the British drove them up from the Carolinas. The Anishinaabe, the 3 Fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. There was 4 really, the Sioux, but then the Blackfoot out west. The Blackfoot were the strongest of all. They'd whip them all in no time flat. They were really strong. All of them were led by strong women. Women were the full driving force of all these native groups. And the Haudenosaunee, you'll read now, I have a friend who goes to longhouse meetings, and Haudenosaunee, you'll read about traditional chiefs and clan mothers. The whole power of the Haudenosaunee is clan mothers in the longhouse. And they're getting that back now. And there's a kind of a butt up in Tyanganaga, there's kind of a butt because the traditional chiefs were made chiefs by the British because they didn't want to deal with women. It was a thing. British wouldn't, women not strong enough, we're not dealing with them. But little did they know that the clan mothers ran everything in the Haudenosaunee society. You didn't become a chief, they made you a chief. There was no such thing as electing chiefs in my day. In the Amawani society, it was all built on consensus. If I said I'm going hunting and you follow me and 20 guys follow me to go hunting and I don't lead them to anything, they're not ever going to follow me again. It's the same on the warpath. You go on the warpath. If you come back with horses and that during the horse era, and not lose anybody, they'll follow you forever. But if you lose people, they won't follow you. When the British came and negotiated treaties and that, they wanted to deal with chiefs. And they'd say, well, you're a chief. And they made the chiefs. Once the treaties were, they said, well, you're now going to be the chief and you're going to be the chief. That's not how it ran. So, but especially in the Haudenosaunee society, it's clan mothers. And if you're a clan mother, when you pass away, your daughter becomes a clan mother. They have a lot of power. A lot of power. And think back to all the times when there's protests up around Tesorano. How many times have you ever seen a man talking to the press? Never. Very rarely. It's a woman, because she's got the power. And they don't come out to protest unless a clan mother tells them to go out and protest. So that's just a close thing. In the Amawini society, the women, pre-contact, there was probably about 15,000 Algonquins that lived along the Ottawa River shed. And this was our territory, running all along the Ottawa River, down through here, okay? Both sides. The Ottawa River wasn't a provincial dividing side, and that's why they're having trouble with the Ontario government making a treaty with the Algonquins right now, because the Algonquins on the Quebec side say, listen, you can't do that, because that dividing line was never a dividing line when we were a nation. So, and Algonquin Park and all through here. This here in the 1300s was kind of a no man's land, because if the Amawini people moved down here, the Haudenosaunee would attack them, and vice versa. So that was, it was just more of a hunting territory. Wolfe Island would have been a summer hunting territory. They would come here and fish, and they would hunt the geese, but there was never any permanent residence here. You would find, I was reading over in your museum this morning, archaeological digs, and they found a lot of stuff, and they would have been summer camps. And the Haudenosaunee lived in the same area for at least 10, 12 years until it was farmed out. 70% of their diet was vegetarian. My people, 80% of our diet was meat, and we would move with the seasons. So we would gather in the summertime as a group and plan for morning raids. And a morning raids is MOURNING. I remember one time in my second book, the editor phoned up and says, oh, we just caught this before it went to print. You spelt morning wrong. I said, no, it's not MORNIG. It's MOURNG. And it's because a morning raid is when you're been attacked and they've stolen your women and children, because that was the main thing. They took the women and children because the community couldn't grow without women and children. Women were really, really important in society. If you touched a woman's hand in the 1300s, they were rough. They did all the work. The men's hands were soft. Like they were responsible for hunting and warfare and protecting everybody. And one thing that is not in my books, because you couldn't put this in the book because it's a research. I read over 100 nonfiction books, writing my books. The reason that there was only about 15,000 Amawini people was, first of all, because we didn't have access to food like the Haudenosaunee did. And the Haudenosaunee had about 75,000 people. The other reason was the Haudenosaunee women were able to have children at a higher capacity than my ancestors. And there's a specific reason for that. Because we moved with the seasons. Haudenosaunee moved every 10 or 11 years after the fields where they grew corn and beans and squash would play out. So if you were born if you were a woman and you were born just after they moved there, you'd be 10 or 11 before they moved again. So if you were a young girl in the Amawini society, Algonquin society, you were moving once every 3 months. Summer camp, winter camp, spring camp. So, and the only thing that we had were dogs, and every family would have about 100 dogs during that era, because they were used for hunting, used for war, and they were used to pull things with. And the young girls would carry about 30 or 40 pounds on their back. So if you're an Algonquin girl, every 3 months you were carrying 30 or 40 pounds on your back, their cervixes collapsed, and they had trouble having children. So I didn't put that in my books because that's something that you can't put that right in about the 1300s. So, and I read that, it was a research paper a professor did in a book I was reading. So that's just, and in the West, it was kind of the same too, because the women, they carried everything on their back. Lots of dogs. There was more dogs. The Plains Society had a lot more dogs too, until the Spaniards, and they didn't become a horse society about 1750, 1760. As the Apaches stole the horses from the Spaniards and the Comanches stole them, and it worked their way up. So my books take place in 1305, and I'm going to read you a story It's a little bit violent towards the end, so my books tend to be violent in spots, but they're not all violent. But there's a reason for the violence. This takes place, my characters are based on people I know. It's easy to write. The toughest thing to do is create a character that's a bad guy. And you guys because they tend to get killed off. And I put the most work into a bad guy. And I hate killing them off because I put so much work in them. Because even though they're a bad guy, people like them, right? Because they have people that like them. But, but they have this thing, I don't like, if you're a reader and you're telling it from the voice of an Algonquin person, and now he's kind of a bad guy. So it's easy to make a good guy. It's easy. But it's hard to make a bad guy. You put a lot of work in him, then you got to kill him off, then you got to make another bad guy. So there's a story in here about a guy with a bad leg. I went to school with a guy, and I don't know what he had polio, but he walked like this. And some days he'd come to school in a crutch. He had a very withered leg. The only thing he didn't do was play hockey. He played soccer, he played touch football, he played basketball, he played everything. And I got thinking I needed a second character in my first book, and I fell in love with this guy, what I created out of him. And he doesn't get introduced to the 11th chapter in this book, and I'm just going to read a little bit about him, and then I'm going to talk about some stuff and read a little bit out of the third book. Middlegimish. Wagoose snapped his head around and yelled, "Brother, stop that!" With that, the two of us turned around, and out of the forest came Middlegimish, Red Oak. Now, the narrator here, his name is Mahingan, and he's got three brothers, Wagoose, Kag, and Middlegimish. "Brothers, if I was a Haudenosaunee, you both would be dead right now. Middlegimish, with you around, we would have no fear of the Haudenosaunee. We know that you would have already have killed them," said Wagoose. "Is that Mizu Piju you call Magadawa Wabin, Black Dawn, with you?" I asked. "Brother, there's only one way to find out, and that is to pretend to attack me." Wagoose then said, "We are not that foolish, Middlegimish." Middlegimish was my third brother. He was the best archer in our tribe, and his power with a Wewe Bushiba Naban, a slingshot, was second to none. Middlegimish was also accomplished with the Onit, the spear, the Migadadnin, the Pagaman war club, and the Mokaman knife. He was a great Minnesino warrior and a great hunter, but our brother had one major problem that kept him from going on the warpath and hunting trips with us. Middlegimish would slow the party down. 22 winters ago, he was born with a club foot. Our brother had trouble walking for any length of distance and could not run at all. And because of this, he honed his weaponry skills to be the finest of all the Amawini. Our family unit and Algonquins all in all treated him as a special gift. And all the great warriors and hunters taught him their skills. And with these teachings, Middlegimish became the best of the best. When he was young, if the other children picked on him or teased him, he was quick to settle in a decisive way. He always stood up for anyone being bullied and gained the respect and fear of his peers. Travel on land was Middlegimish's biggest hindrance, but when it came to canoeing or swimming, no one in our band was his equal. And as long as I could remember, no one had ever beaten him in swimming, archery, or a canoeing contest. Many had tried, and when the Innu and Malisite came for gatherings, they always brought their top warriors to try and defeat him in these contests. The Innus lived along the Lake St. John area, the French called them the Montagnais, and the Malisite lived in Maine and New Brunswick area. They were never successful in beating us. His upper body was the envy of all young men. He had one good leg that was strong and healthy, but the leg with the club foot was withered. And because Middlegimish was so well treated by the warriors when he was young, he had taken it upon himself to be the self-appointed teacher of all the young children for their weaponry and hunting skills. When Middlegimish was 12 winters, he came upon a panther that had a young male cub. The cub was black, and the black panther is a melanistic variant and very rare as a white panther. He watched the mother and cub from a distance, and the female came to accept him. And Minigimish observed as the mother killed game and brought it back to the young one. And when the cub got older, the Mishipiju took the cub on hunting trips and let him watch as she made her kill. And one early morning, the mother was hunting and brought down a deer. The young male was lying in the woods watching, and Minigumish was at a distance. As the mother started to drag the kill to her cub's hiding place, a pack of several wolves came upon the panther and attacked her for the fresh kill. She had no chance and died defending her prey and her cub's hiding place. Minigumish knew that the cub was now defenseless and needed his help to survive. He got to the cub while the wolves were preoccupied with his mother. Then he grabbed him and took him back to the den. For the next 6 or 8 months, Minigumish brought meat for the young male. He never once brought him to the village. His thinking was that this was one of Kiche Manitou's special creatures, and that he must leave him wild. With the help of Minigumish supplying him with game, the cat became big and strong and totally devoted to my brother. The cat would never show himself unless Minigumish called him out of hiding. Magadewa Ben was never far from my brother, always lurking in the shadows. Minigumish gained his warriorhood long before he ever took the WIHS journey. He was now 22 winters old, but when he was 16, he proved beyond a doubt that he and Magadewa Waben were never ever to be underestimated. It was during the spring running of the suckers, and Minigumish was about an hour from the village along a small stream, spearing the fish to bring home. My brother never strayed too far from the confines of the band, and because of his struggle to walk, but to this day, he went beyond his own boundaries. Where it would take us an hour to get someplace, it took him 2 or 3 times as long. Minigumish was spearing and bringing in the suckers. He would use a spear like this. And I lost my place. And every once in a while would throw one to the edge of the forest for Magadewa Waben. Minigumish was so engrossed in his task that he never noticed the 4 Haudenosaunee on the opposite bank until Magadewa Waben screamed a warning. They were young and probably all out on a trek to find village locations or to capture lone people off by themselves in the forest. They traveled lightly for speed and effectiveness, living off the land. The 4 warriors charged across the small stream, and Minigumish threw his fishing spear at the lead warrior, catching the young man by surprise at the speed and accuracy of the throw. The spear entered his throat and exited halfway out the other side. He died in the stream, reddening the water where he fell. When the next warrior reached the bank, he was met head-on by Magadewa Waben, who knocked him down and started tearing at his face. My brother grabbed his war club from his belt, and with the 3rd Haudenosaunee upon him, broke the man's kneecap with one mighty swing. He then hit him in the face as the man dropped to his hands and knees. The last foe had only gotten 3/4 of the way across the stream. He was younger than the others, and he was terrified. He had just watched his 3 brethren killed before his own eyes in less time than it had taken him to run across that small waterway. And before Minigumish had a chance to call him off, the panther splashed into the stream and ran towards the young warrior to make the last kill. Then with a mighty swipe of his paw, he shredded the right side of the foe's face. With a command from my brother, Magadewa Waben stood in the stream, screaming and snarling at the last Haudenosaunee. Minigumish then said, "My cat and I will let you live on this day. You go back to your people, and you tell them what happened here. I will leave your friends for the animals to enjoy. If I ever see you again, I will kill you on sight. I will know you by the scar the Black One has given you. Go!" With that, the young warrior ran off downstream, leaving a trail of blood following him in the swift-flowing water. In the coming years, the story of the Amawane warrior with only one good leg and his panther of death spread among the Haudenosaunee. The Iroquois, we were told, skirted these woods since then because they said it smelled of death. They told the story that it was Michibu, the great hair trickster god, inventor of fishing, who was disguised as an Algonquin warrior but had one leg that wouldn't change to a human appendage. And the Algonquin believed that they were made by Michibou. And he also made the earth, fishing nets, water, fish, and deer. And he lives where the sun rises and the souls of good Algonquins go to live with Michibou. The Haudenosaunee also said that at the same battle, Michibou was aided by Gitche enemy Bijou, the fabulous night panther. Gitche enemy Bijou was an underwater creature, and to the Algonquins, the underwater panther was the most powerful of all the underwater beings. They believed him to be helpful and protective, but many times he was viewed as malevolent and brought death and misfortune. The Haudenosaunee also feared that their men may have been killed by shapeshifters. This was an enemy who was to be feared beyond all else. Their powers were immense. Minigumish then awakened me from my thoughts. Wagusha Mahingan, I have not come to sneak up on you and play games. There is something on the Sibi River that you must see. So that's an introduction to Minigumish and his sidekick.
Good story.
Thanks. So they are legends in Algonquin society. You can Google them. They're right there for you to read about. Michibou is on the rocks up at, and you'll find him in 3 or 4 places across Canada. He would be underwater, and if he didn't like you, he would tip your canoe, and if he make waves, and if he liked you, he left you alone. So, anyway, so that's the story about. Any questions? This would have been a spear that they would have used in the 1300s. This was made by putting it in a coal, sharpening it, putting it in a coal fire and harden it, and you'd make the point sharp, and you'd spear fish with it. You'd use it in war, and it throws pretty good too. But
Where did you get it?
I made it. Some of the weapons I buy, some I've made. Yeah, I didn't find it. No. So the war club that he would have used probably on that Haudenosaunee warrior would have been this war club, a club similar to this or to this, one of these. And I'll pass them around. You can lift them and see what they're like. That's kind of old. You just have the heads. Man, the head won't fall out today. Sometimes it wants to fall out. This is a woodlands. This is what they made them out of. The glue that they would have used to put this ball in, or even to put that in, would have been made out of boiling hoofs. In the prairies, they boil the buffalo hoofs, and they make a glue out of it. So that's...
And where would you have found a rock that symmetrical?
It was in my backyard.
Oh.
I was in the, and it was there one day, and I said, I know what I'm going to do with that. And yeah, so.
Is that an eagle feather?
That's a turkey feather. Most of feathers the natives wore were turkey feathers. Eagle feathers were only given to you if you did a brave deed. The Blackfoot were the only tribe that didn't give eagle feathers, and they would give a little guy like the Zingos here, and they would tie them in his hair or put them on their clothes, and that's a white weasel, ermine. Yep. And that's the Blackfoot would wear that. And you see some of the Blackfoot women. I just was looking at pictures of a powwow, and the Blackfoot women had those in their braids. But so you know they're Blackfoot if they got that, and that's turkey feathers. This here is not from the 1300s, and this is from Contact. And anybody can guess why this is from Contact? Just by looking at it? It looks like a what?
This is a gun.
Yeah. So what would have happened? Everybody ever seen Last of the Mohegans with Daniel Day-Lewis?
Oh, gosh.
No? That's a great movie. Anybody seen it? When Jenkins Cook threw at the Huron warrior that was running away and got him in the back, this is what he threw at him. Now this would have been a gun, and they would have traded for it, and then either the firing mechanism broke on it and they couldn't fix it, or they ran out of powder. They would have taken it and steamed it a bit. A lot of times you will see a brass in here, and we would put tacks on it or insignia to signify, if they killed somebody. In Blackfoot society, you couldn't get married unless you killed two enemy.
To what?
Enemy. You had to kill two enemy before. Two. No, you couldn't. You couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't unless you killed two enemy. You couldn't. You couldn't marry. These two here. Everything some things I make, some things I buy. All these furs I bought off a Mohawk trapper. I was out in Winnipeg and a lady came up to me and she says, I was doing a book signing and I had some of my furs out there and she said, have these been ethically trapped? I say, all I know is that I ethically bought them from a Haudenosaunee trader. So, you know, that's all I can say to you. And these signify what we would have wore in those, we used for furs. This is a bone knife. It's all bone. And
What kind of bones?
that's deer antler, and that's probably might be elk or something. Mm-hmm. The guy that made it put his initials on it. This is an antler, so that would have used before war. This would definitely use before war because you couldn't cut any food with that.
Why? Oh, it's
Just a point. It's just to stab somebody in there right underneath the ribs. So everything was about surviving in the 1300s. I remember once I went to QE and was talking to kids. I said, if you needed to eat, you didn't have a refrigerator to go to get food. And he kind of looked at me and said, really? I said, yeah. So I'll just take that. Thank you. This here, I'll get this other thing going on. Midogumish was very, very good with this. This is a slingshot. These are very accurate. During the invasion, if you ever read the book 1421, or 1492, I'm sorry, 1492. If you read that book, they talked about the slingshot. And if the Aztecs if all their warriors had slingshots, they would have defeated the Spanish. Because they had slingshots, just not all their warriors did, and they could kill a horse. They were so accurate and so strong with these. And Midogumish, you'll read, he's quite a warrior, and if you read any of my books, you'll know how accurate the slingshot is. Now I bought this down in South Dakota. It's a Lakota arrow, and it's a Lakota arrow for a whole bunch of reasons. It's made out of gooseberry, so it's very light. It's got an obsidian tip on it, which is not a Lakota, which would not be a Lakota, would be something the Lakotas would have. This is a map of all the natives in North America and Central America pre-contact. And I think there's a couple hundred, 250. You have to remember, I don't talk politics or anything, but I'm just going to tell you, when they talk, I'm going to tell you two things. Treaties is between nations, and most native societies that are in the treaty area on treaty reservations will tell you that they're a government themselves because they made a treaty with the government of Canada. Okay, and all treaty money. A lot of times you'll read these columnists and they'll say, "Why are we giving these Indians all this money and everything and all that and stuff?" You have to realize that the money that the natives get, especially on the reservations, are not taxpayers' money. They're the money that they sign for on treaties and that put in trust for them, and it's the interest that comes off, and it's based on what the treaty. So the treaty says you live on this amount of land, and we give you enough money for education and for this and that and housing. And because most native schools, they got about $4,000 less per pupil than regular schools, and it's all because of the treaties that are signed. Okay, so that's where the money comes from. It's not a taxpayer thing. So anyway, so this obsidian tip would have came from the Shoshone, and also they were called the Snake. But they're Shoshone. They lived here. Lakota lived over here. So in between with the Crow and the Cheyenne. So they would have probably, a Lakota warrior would either traded or gambled, because natives love to gamble, and won this arrow tip, or they killed another warrior and they got this obsidian tip. They're very sharp, and they do their job. Now, a lot of times when natives would hunt, if they were just hunting birds or squirrels, they would use blunt arrows. And that's in young boys, when they first started out, they got blunt arrows, and they just hunted small game. So sinew wrapped around, and you all know what sinew is, runs on the back of an animal's legs, and that's what makes them run. Again, the glue, these are turkey feathers, and I told you about how they made the glue. The specific thing about the Lakota, who are great buffalo hunters, this has a significant paint on it. So it's yellow, black, and yellow. So it's egg yolk and charcoal on here. Now, this arrow could be like this. The next arrow you'd see was like this, or it could be all red or anything. So if you were my wife and I went on the buffalo and you went out to the killing fields and took your daughters with you and your mother, you have to figure out what my lances looked like or what my arrows looked like. Meat was all shared, but it was the responsibility of the hunter's family to butcher that animal. And for them to know on the killing fields, and you've got 150 buffalo laying out there dead, what arrow, who were you responsible to butcher for? And you'd look, and the markings would be on the arrow. Everything that was painted on a native's horse, anything that a native would paint when he went to war had significance. It wasn't a dippity doodle. They stick their hand in paint and did. If they painted themselves yellow, they would they'd be willing to die in hand-to-hand. A handprint on their face meant they were good in hand-to-hand fighting. If they were painted black, they were willing to die. They weren't going to leave the field unless they died or somebody else died. Pass that around. On their horse, their horses were, if there was lightning painted on them, that meant the horse could run fast. If there were circles around his eyes, he could see really good. And if a horse came back to camp and had a red mark on it, that means his warrior died, and he took his own blood and put it on his horse before he went, and the horse would come back to camp, and they know that he passed away. So there's all these things that now this is a replica bull. Okay, now natives cut their hair for reasons, and a lot of I tell these stories to the kids, and then they kind of, wow, okay. I get a kick out of sometimes when you see used to, not too much anymore, but hockey teams, young hockey teams, they cut their hair with the scalp locks. And if they only knew why they cut their hair with a scalp lock, why natives cut their hair with a scalp lock. And the only ones that really did that was the Undant, the Huron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Pawnee, because they lived in longhouses with 40 or 50 people in them. Okay, my people only lived in conical shapes, and most of the prairies lived in teepees. And what happens when you live with 40 or 50 people? You get head lice. So the man didn't have the time to sit by the fire and let a woman comb his hair, so he shaved his head, left a bristle on it. The women would sit beside the fire, use wooden combs or bone combs, and pull the lice out and just throw them in the fire. Now, Algonquin men that didn't really happen because they'd only live with their families. There'd be 3 or 4 in a tent or in a conical shape or just whatever their families was. Most natives in those had eye problems because of the smoke. And they'd use a mixture of gypsum weed and that to try to alleviate them, but like they had a lot of eye problems. If you were left-handed, if you see an Algonquin person and their head was shaved on that side, you knew he was left-handed. If he was shaved on this side, you knew he was right-handed. Unless he wore braids. And why do you think he did that?
Keep the hair out of the bow.
Keep the hair out of the bow. Because the last thing you're growing back and you're letting that go, and then all of a sudden your hair goes with it. So that's just a replica bow, but that's something that they would have. They would have feathers on it.
Rick, you said 3 or 4 people in a family. Wouldn't they have a lot of children?
The Algonquins not so much. The Haudenosaunee, the prairie people, they would have. I'm just reading a bunch of books about the Blackfoot. They might have 4 or 5 kids, but that was between 4 or 5 wives. And why they had so many wives is because warriors would get killed, and they might be married, and so somebody would take the wife because she'd starve to death, or unless somebody looked after her, and. A lot of times they just took sisters because the sisters would get along. If you brought somebody else in that they didn't like them, The head, there was always one, the first one that was married. She was kind of the boss. All the other ones came in. She'd say, well, you need to marry my sister. She hasn't got a husband, and et cetera, like this. If anything, especially with the Blackfoot, but most the Plains tribes, if a husband decided he was going to get a divorce, he didn't get anything. He got his horse. She got everything. The dogs, the teepee, everything in the teepee. They belonged to her. So they didn't get anything.
And could she remarry?
She could marry, yep. Yeah, and if, yeah. Now, in a lot of the societies, the gay people were held in a high echelon. They were very important in the communities. I have two very strong women in my 3 books. They're gay, and they're based on actual research that I've did. The gay people looked after elders. So if I got no children left, they made sure I got enough to eat, and they looked after orphans. They raised orphans. If there was no family, gay people raised orphans. Gay, and there was a couple women that were very good warriors that never married. Blackfoot had a very famous warrior woman, and Apache's Victoria's sister and she was also she could see the future, and she always warned them that the army was coming. She knew everything. If you ever get a chance to read, her name was Lupin, I think, and the warrior woman in the Blackfoot never ever married. And this Sioux person who was an enemy of the Blackfoot left his tribe because he was in love with her, and joined the tribe, but she would never marry him. And she got killed by the Flatheads in a battle in her late 30s or 40s, and he was so wrought that he went up to her, lay beside her, and stabbed himself in the heart. It's a true story. Yeah, these books are. I've read this. I read her book, and then this Edwin guy. I just reading his last 2 books. Was called the Vengeful Blackfoot Woman, and they're all short stories, and they all run from the pre-contact to contact, and they're great stories. I'm just reading the Amazing Death of Calf Shirt, which is another one, who was reincarnated. This guy was reincarnated, and he was killed by the Crow in a fight, and 2 years later there's a little baby born, and when he could talk, he took him to where he was killed, and he said, that's where I was killed. And that was a horse. You got my horse now, and he became a shaman, and he healed his people all the time. Amazing stories. There's some amazing stories. So for gay men, the Cheyenne, they called them au contraires or something like that, and they would put the clothes on backwards, and if you asked them a question, they'd say yes if they meant no, and no if they meant yes, and they would lead the dog soldiers into war, and he'd ride his horse backwards. Yeah. Great warriors too. Great warriors. They all, so in gay society, pre-contact, very very looked up to and very well thought of, and they considered them a special part. But a lot of them some of the guys would dress like women and do the women's work, help the women, and they didn't want to fight, and they just became, and then they were part of that society. So anyway. I'll pass some of these furs around, and then I'll read you another story. If you got any questions at all, ask. Yes?
I noticed some of the wooden artifacts you used around there, lighter wood. Did they not use hardwood much?
Yeah, probably. I buy these off of native artisans. Yeah, there were some down in the States that were made of hardwood. That I was at the Gathering of the Nations in Albuquerque. I would have loved to have brought them back, but I didn't have. I had all carry-on luggage, and there was no way I could bring back these weapons. They were made out of buffalo jaw bones and the real way. Now hardwood, it would be in the woodlands. I don't know what this is made out of, but this would be a knot out of a tree, and they just round it. But it's got to be light enough that they can swing it, but not too heavy. So like that other one. Where was the other one? Oh, there. That one's pretty heavy. Before I pass this around, I'm going to pass this little guy around. natives had basically 3 musical instruments: the drum, the rattle, and some of them had flutes. This is a turtle, and if this was the 1300s, his head would still be on him. The hickory stick would be stuck down his throat, and it would either be pebbles or birds' beaks in here to make the rattle. The guy that made this said he's got BBs in here. So now, who's heard the story of the native calendar for the turtle? Have you ever heard the native calendar? So all turtles, whether it's that little guy that you used to buy at Zeller's and take home and get salmonella from and, die from that poisoning until they quit selling them, or the big sea turtle, they're all the same. Okay? So on the top shell, there's 13 divisions on this top shell. Any quick answer why it's 13?
13 moons.
13 moons, yep. So 13 moons in a year. Around the sides, there's 28. What's that?
4 weeks.
Yep. Every 28 days, there's a full moon, because that's why we have 13 moons. On the bottom, there's 12. 12 months. So we call it native, the natives call that their native calendar. Okay, so this guy, he's got all sorts of names, but the easiest one that I can remember is Mahingananamush. And this isn't a wolf skin, this is a coyote. And the coyotes aren't indigenous to this area. They came over in the early 1900s over the land bridge in Sault Ste. Marie. And they're a plains animal, always have been a plains animal. If you read anything about the Apaches, I've read a couple books about the Apaches, and I've never seen an animal, and I've read a lot of books from a lot of nations, and Apaches, everything they talk about the wolf the coyote is sexual. It's all sexual stuff. But they won't kill a coyote. If they go out to go hunting or go on the warpath, a coyote crosses their path, they'll turn around, come back to camp again, and then go out again. So this is Mahingananamush, what we call wolf dog, and a wolf we call Mahingan. So he's got another long name that I can use, but anyway. This little guy here, there's pretty sly. Foxes are pretty neat animals. This is Wagoosh. And these are Anishinaabe names. Beautiful fur, beautiful animal. And I've never hunted, and I don't know how, if I lived in the 1300s, I would have to do it to survive. My stepfather, if he could knock it on the head, catch it with a hook or shoot it, he ate it. So I ate enough wild meat when I was a kid to last me a lifetime.
But in those days, they eat whatever they could get.
Oh yeah, especially Amawini. Yeah, they would eat the meat from the fox, and they would make clothes out of that, moccasins, and anything to keep warm. You didn't, there wasn't any Walmarts around then, so you couldn't go and buy clothes. It didn't come to the contact that they were able to start trading for cloth, and then they would make a buffalo, nothing would be wasted. They always left an offering for grizzly bears or coyotes or wolves. There was always left an offering for them. But a grizzly bear can smell a kill from 8 miles away. So they had to make sure that somebody was guarding if they killed something, because a grizzly bear would be there pretty quick. This is Nagig. And if you've ever canoed on some of the back lakes, these are the most magnificent animals you ever see in the river. It's an otter.
What's an otter?
Yeah, beautiful fur. And, funny thing, I was to, you've probably been reading the story of these 2 kids that are murdered, and they're right up here. Okay, they're up in this area, right? Get them. I showed you guys once. Yeah, it was up. Yeah, right up and around here. Anyway, I was at the Writers' Union and the Frontier School Board, which is the biggest geographical school board in Canada, brought me to Manitoba last year. They took me to God's Lakes Narrows, which you only can get in by flying, and they took me to Churchill. Both schools read my books. The God's Lake Narrows had 16 kids in the whole school, and they had 140. And it was amazing school. In this school, you had from JK to grade 12. It was right on the shores of Hudson's Bay, and there they had, inside that school was a hospital with a cafeteria, a hockey rink, a curling rink, a movie theater, and a bowling alley, and a huge library. Everything was there. They should pattern that when they build schools down here. So these kids are up in this area, and let me tell you, I flew through here. It's nothing but boreal forest and lakes. So those kids have got to be either dead by now or are going to be dead. We're going to eat alive. So this guy here is my, he's my rescue fur, because I always forget his name too. Yeah, Wabashishi. And this is his summer fur, and he was in a reservation store, and I dropped by and see it, and they had a price of $150 on him, and he was covered in dust and everything. I said, listen, I take these around and show them to kids and that. I'll give you $50 for him. I got his head taped together because his head and some staples in it because he's falling apart. But that's a marten. Yeah, that's his summer coat. This is Ezeban. He's a raccoon. And this is a tail from a raccoon, too. And this kind of again, I bought this off of somebody and relieved them of it because he looked old. On the tail, which is a different, he's a raccoon tail because I bought it off that fur trapper. You can tell if it's a fake tail or a real tail. And how you can tell if it's a fake tail, you feel there's a cord, or how you tell if it's a real tail, you fake there's a cord there. And if there's no cord, it's a fake fur, because they can't wag their tail unless that nerve runs down through the tail. So you can feel it. This here is Waboosh. Make moccasins out of this little guy. He's a rabbit. Beautiful fur. The insides of the moccasins. And natives, if they go on a warpath, they'd have 3 pairs of moccasins with them, because they'd wear them out. They'd carry a medicine bag, and in this medicine bag, I got sage in it, but they would carry tobacco, which if they were wounded, they put in their mouth and chew and put on a sore, on their wound. It would heal it because it's got an antiseptic in it. Honey, and sage or anything that would help to heal them. It was their medicine bag. This is shishig. Oh, geez, I'm stumbling here. Yeah, shigag. Now, shigag's got an interesting story. There's an interesting story in my book with a little girl and a skunk. But if natives seen a skunk at night, they would follow the skunk. And why would they think that they would follow the skunk? Where's he going?
Probably fish.
No, skunks like bees. They like to eat the bees. So native would follow him along, and no, they like the bees. The natives like the honey. The bears like the honey, and he would be eating bees, and they would follow him. And yeah, there's some interesting stories about skunks and honey and things in my book. This is a mick. And this is what caused all the disease and all the heartache and everything for the natives, the beaver. Capitalism came with beaver. And this is just a small beaver. And this little guy beside him is washushk, and that's just a piece of muskrat. You can see the difference in the fur. And this is ojik. He's a fisher. And I asked the M&R guy one time, fishers eat cats? He said, I've never heard him eat a cat in my life. Everybody says, well, the cats disappear because they bring fishers in. Fishers eat porcupines, and that's their #1 delicacy. And they tack their face, and they chew them. If you ever see a porcupine in the woods that's dead, and all he's left is the top of him, because the fisher attacks him, he chews off his face, and then he flips him over. A fox will eat a porcupine in the wintertime. They can burrow underneath the snow and come up underneath them. But that's the #1 food group for a fisher. So, Odijik, O-D-J-I-K. This little head bonnet here, I didn't make it. It's got an interesting story to it. Before I'll pass these, everybody's seen shells. And ever seen Black Robe? Ever seen the movie Black Robe? Well, you gotta. It's a great Canadian movie. Tantu Cardinals in it, Graham Greene. It's a great movie. They use that. They would use it to scrape hides with, or cut fingers off and stuff like that. Cut meat with them. They're very sharp. In Black Robe, you'd see what they're using them for. So, I just wanted to tell you the furs from this little guy here. Natives tan furs by using the brain in the animal. They take the brain out and they tan them. So from that little guy there to the coyote, their brain was big enough to tan the fur. So that's what they use.
What does that work? How does that work?
Well, it's the acid in the brain in the liquid, and to get to there, see, to get to there, they would tan it with the brain. Okay, and stretch it out and dry it. Okay, so from that little guy's brain was probably used to tan it.
How do they preserve all this food, like buffalo especially?
Smoke it. The natives, the women out in the prairies would take the meat and dry it, take it in strips and dry it, and then berries and mix it up with berries and fat, buffalo fat, and you could store it for years. The Métis had a great business in the 1800s for pemmican. They sold it to the white people. And it basically kept a lot of whites from starving. But they put it in parafleece bags. Now, I would have liked to have a parafleece bag. I just bought one from a Cree woman out west, and it's being sent to me. I met her in Albuquerque. A parafleece bag. A parafleece bag. It is made out of boiled leather. Now, this is made out of a washkashi. This is deer. So the spirit of the deer is in it, and the spirit of the cedar. So that they would boil that. Okay. So the Plains natives would take. They'd either make rawhide out of their parafleece, and parafleece, it would just be as hard as this table. They make shields out of it, which were bulletproof, and it looked like a big purse. And this Cree woman had one, and like she's giving it to me $150, and like they're worth like $1,200. Like and she's used it for years. She's going to make herself a new one, and so she said, I would love to have it here today for you. They are, they're like it looks like a very brittle type of leather, but it's not brittle. You could probably take a hammer, you wouldn't dent it. And that's what they stored their food in. They stored their pemmican. Everything was smoked. Fish, you could, in the wintertime, of course, you could keep it. In the summertime, if they were hunting, if the Amawini were hunting fish, they would dig a hole, put cedar boughs on it, lay the fish, put cedar boughs on it, lay the fish. Okay, it'll keep for about 2 weeks. If you're an Algonquin person in the wintertime, if you ate every other day, you were doing really, really good. I'm just writing about. I haven't got a map of Saskatchewan. Jeez. I don't think it's not in Manitoba. There's the natives. The Cree, the Assiniboine, and the Sato, which became the Anishinaabe when they moved out west. The French called them the Sato because they came from Sault Ste. Marie area. There's 3 salt lakes out there, the biggest salt lakes in Canada. They're called Quill Lakes. Now, I didn't want to use Quill Lakes in my book, and there are 3 of them side by side. And I phoned to 12 different places in Saskatchewan, talked to elders and everybody. What's the Anishinaabe? What's the native name for Quill Lake? Nobody knew. I phoned Indigenous Affairs in Saskatchewan, and I ended up talking to this woman who she's assistant minister. I know her husband quite well. He teaches at the University of Regina. So she said, well, phone him. I phoned him. We talked for 45 minutes. He didn't know. So everybody that I phoned, if you find out, please let us know. I got a hold of this elder, and he's a senator. He's not this native reservation. They're called senators if they sit on council. He knew the name right off the bat. He told me the name. Then I had to phone everybody back and said, "This is the name." And I said, "Now that you know, I want you to start using it." And it's the native name was salt in English. Yeah, then it was the Anishinaabe name for salt. It was called Quill Lake after contact because this lake, these 3 lakes, the natives went there to hunt wildfowl and birds and cranes and that because it was a big migratory bird route, spring and fall. And feathers were about this thick on the shoreline. Well, the English took the feathers and shipped them back to England to use them as quill pens. So they called it Quill Lake system. Big Quill Lake, Big Quill Lake, and Little Quill Lake. So if you ever read my book, you'll know that the Anishinaabe name is in there. So, yeah, okay, talk about this.
Just before you
Yes.
how did you get so interested in, I know that you are, but how did you learn all this?
Well, I'm a ferocious reader. And when I retired when I was 50. And I was looking for things to read about my people, and there was nothing. If you Googled Algonquin, you got Algonquin Park, The Last Algonquin, which was a book written about a guy lived in the end of Long Island during the 1900s and stabbed and killed a guy, and he was an Algonquin and stabbed and killed a guy in the Bronx and went and lived on the end of Long Island, and that was his story. There was nothing else written. How to make an Algonquin canoe. So I said, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a book, but I want to get published. I'm not going to self-publish I started writing it, and then I said, you know something? I'm going to write about 1300s. There's been enough written about the religion and everything like that. I'm going to write about pre-contact. So I had to start reading, and I'm going to use the native languages. So I got a dictionary, and then a dictionary from Kitchikan in Quebec. And then I thought, oh, I can't write this. I don't know how. I don't know how to put the accents and everything on it. I have a Mohawk friend. He's a computer tech at Queens. He said there's this code called a CC code. So where you press Alt and a set of numbers, and you get the letter with the accent on it. So now I can type Blackfoot. I can type anything with this, knowing this. So I said, oh, geez, that's good. So I wrote the book, did the research. I've read over 100 nonfiction books and traveled all across the country. My wife has went with me on 99% of the stuff. And yeah, so that's how I got started on that. And I learned so much. And now we're downsizing. We're moving to a smaller place in Napanee, and I got this. I had 2 huge bookcases. And my wife says, "What are you going to do with these books?" Sharbert Lake High School is 60% Indigenous. It's not called. It's called Granite Ridge. So I went back there and I said, "I got 100 books. Would you take them?" He said, "Yes, we'll take them, and we're going to put them in a section library all by itself, and it's going to be called the Algonquin Quest Series Research Area." So I was very happy about that because they're all nonfiction. Some of them written in 1600s. I read a couple books from the 1600s. It was like sitting at your dentist and reading a medical journal. It was written in the language, how they would write it, the old English language then. Oh, I had 2 books I had to read. Like I read them, but anyway. So hopefully this is going to go back there. Now this was gifted to me by a teacher, and it's got a great story. And it was gifted to her by a friend it was gifted to her friend's husband in the 50s. And he lived in Winnipeg, and he belonged to the Rifle and Gun Club or whatever in Winnipeg. So she says, "I've had this on, I can't use it." And I was given classes at the senior center. A couple of times I did some classes there, and she gave this to me. She says, I said, "Okay." So I phoned out to the Winnipeg Rifle Society or Gun and Rifle Society or whatever, and said the guy's name was Alan Robert Todd. He was in the Air Force. And the guy, I don't know him. 2 hours later, he gets in contact with, I talked to a guy. They knew him, but they don't know why he was given this. So he would have had to do something very nice for a Cree person. This is a Cree traditional war bonnet. And I talked to a friend of mine, Onagante. I don't know if anybody knows Onagante from Kingston. And like when you buy beadwork from a native, everything means something. And the beadwork all on here means something. And what it is a lodge meeting being held by the Cree. And then the Bear Clan is always, they always look after everybody. So if you belong to the Bear Clan, you're protectors. The Bear Clan's out here, Eagle Nest Clan. It's an Eagle Nest Clan because of the circular here, medicine wheel. The color represents Eagle Nest. The yellow and black points on each side are arrowheads and black shafts with blue feathers telling us 2 arrows are stronger than 1. So that means if you put 3 arrows together, it's hard to break. 1 arrow's easy, so it's always better if all the clans are together. The middle is the meeting lodge. The 2 green, white, orange, and blue diamonds represent the great mystery of life, and the 2 points on the side of the balance are male and female. Okay. The 2 black triangles on each end of the meeting lodge are the Bear Clan, guarding the entrance of the meeting lodge. That's what the Bear Clan does, is guard. White line down the middle is a trail showing the people walking side by side. The white and purple circle in the middle of the lodge, highlighted by the yellow dot, is the circle of life. The Thunderbird wings are in the middle. They are white, blue, and black. And in the middle of the lodge, the Cree clans are coming together to make decisions on war, peace, etc. The colors that they represent: red, fire; yellow, earth; white, sky; and blue, water. So that's all in that beadwork. And so Charbet Lake, they're making a case to put it in, and when they do, it'll go back there. And my picture was in the paper 2 or 3 years ago, and this guy phoned me out of nowhere. Never heard of him in my life, and he said, "I got all these arrowheads and everything." He talked with me for a long time. He was a white guy, and him and his father, we're talking 60 years ago, lived on the Grand River. And they would go out and they would dig along the river. And they found over 1,500 arrowheads. Until one day they got a knock on the door. And they said, "Do not go there anymore." It was a couple of Haudenosaunee guys. They were in the Six Nations Reserve. There was another guy digging with him. So anyway, when his father died, he gave, there's a college within the University of Toronto. It starts with an E or something. They gave 2 or 3 cases to them, but all they did was tuck them away. And he showed me these cases, and they were the size of 2 of my maps put together, and writ full arrowheads, pre-contact, everything from pedestals to smashed corn and grains to spearheads, arrowheads. It was the most amazing collection I ever seen. So when I donated the books to Charbet Lake, I phoned them and I said, "Listen," his first name, I said, "I don't want to ever see in the paper that you died and I go to your place and these are in a yard sale. Here's something that we can do." I said, "When I take this bonnet back, you're going to go back with me and you're going to talk to these people. And if you like them, you're going to give them these arrowheads." So he's pretty protective of them, but he's probably in his late 70s. They're just going to, they need to be someplace. So anyway, any questions?
So they're setting up a center at Charbet Lake?
No, in the high school,
Okay.
in the library.
Oh, okay.
And if you go to Charbet Lake, along the walls, because there are so many native kids, there's a lot of native things on the walls. So they're making a case for that to put it in. All my books are in a special part of the library. So, which, I'm glad I just didn't have to take them, and they'd end up, separate. So these kids are all, they can use them for research material and everything. There's great books, like books that I found in flea markets, and in all the back of my books, there's a bibliography about the books I read. Some of them are good, some of them are real good. Like if I ever suggest you read any book, Bloody Mohawk by John Burles, and I bought it in the New York State Museum in Albany, New York. It's a true story about the French and Indian Wars and the American Revolution. It's very, very violent, and but it's nonfiction, and it's one of the best books I've ever read about that circa era. Bloody Mohawk. And it's not about the Mohawk Indians, it's about the Mohawk River. And Tyanganega, who was Brant, that was his name, during the French and Indian Wars, he burnt to the ground 220 villages. Nobody lived north of Albany. You couldn't live north of Albany. The Mohawks would burn you out. The 220 villages would be, you know, if there was a grist mill or a water or a sawmill there, and 20 people living that was counted as a village then. But and then what the Americans did to the Iroquois at the end of the war, it was terrible. So if you ever read it, it's violent, indicative of the area, true stuff, and it's written by Richard Burleth. It's called Bloody Mohawk. So somebody else had a question?
So you've mentioned 3 movies. One was the one with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Last of the Mohawks.
The Last of the Mohawks.
Yeah, with Wes Studi and yeah, Last of the Mohegans. Okay. Yeah, Last of the Mohegans. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Okay. Andrew's my son. That's my son and wife over there.
And then Black Robe.
Black Robe.
But the first one was it the Reformer?
Oh, the Reverend. Yeah.
Reverend.
Yeah, Reverend. Yeah, that's a good, and that's based on a true story about a fur trapper. The ending wasn't based on what actually happened, but everything was based on actual events that happened to this guy, and it was a great movie. I really liked it. But there are 3 of the better movies that I've watched. Any other questions before? Yeah.
You mentioned a number 250. Was that the different the number of tribes? Mm-hmm.
Yep.
In what area from?
Central America and up to here. Okay, you've heard of natives calling this Turtle Island. Do you know? Yeah, we're North America, Turtle Island. Do you know why they call it Turtle Island?
It's a turtle.
It looks like a turtle. Yeah, you got the feet here, the head up here, the tail, and the two feet down here. So the Baja Peninsula, Florida, 2 feet. The tail is Central America. The head is the north, and the other 2 feet are here and here. So anyway, all these maps take place in my books, and you can actually go to these places. I got to tell a story here. I always got stories. I could talk for 3 hours, but anyway, Anacostia Island. How many people know where Anacostia Island is? It's 2.5 times the size of Prince Edward Island. It's got 21 rivers on it. It's got a waterfall 1.5 times the size of Niagara Falls. Not for volume of water, but it's higher. It's and during the Second World War, it was always been owned by French nobility. And in the 1900s, a Belgian guy bought it, and he put deer, buffalo, elk, and there was the only thing on it was bears. The Mi'kmaq call it where you go to hunt the bear. And there was deer, elk, moose, and buffalo he put on it. But now the deer ate everybody out of house and home. There's no foxes there left anymore. There's no bears or anything. There's 160,000 deer on this island and 220 people. During the Second World War, the Canadian government found out that this Belgian guy was selling the island to the Germans for a U-boat base. So they ended up buying it from him. And there's where it is, right there off the Gaspé Peninsula. My second book takes place there for about 4 or 5 chapters. It's an interesting place. I wanted to go. Muriel had no way she wanted to go. There's 2 ways you can get there. Take a ferry from Sept-Îles and then catch it the next week going back. Or take the train to, I think it's Laninzaville, and fly over for 3 days. And you have to have 2 people. They'll give you a truck and everything like this, and then come back 3 days later. And it's a beautiful island. Dandelions grow 8 feet tall. It's temperate climate in the summertime. Anacostia Island. You know, that's the size of it. So, yeah, and so the guy said, well, I can't get anybody to go. He said, well, I'll get you a little French blonde from Quebec City that can go with you. I said, my wife wouldn't like that, so we're not going to do that. So I was one of the places that I write about, I never went to it. So I did a lot of research and phoned people and talked to them about it. And, pardon me? It's in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, right in the mouth of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Yep. It's the only port is Port Mounier. 220 people there. There's an airport there, and there's a port there. I said to the guy, I go over, I said, "There's a bar. Is there a bar there I can have a few beers?" And he says, "No, that burnt down, but we do have a liquor store." So the only people that really live on the island here, they have deer hunting season. You're allowed 2 deer. And most guys get them within the first 2 hours they're there, and then the rest of the week they spend drinking. So, yeah, it's an interesting place. So, in my second book, talk about Anacostia Island, and I like writing about places that you can actually go to. So, I write about. I love going canoeing, and my wife and I would go canoeing, and my son, and I get a lot of ideas of that. So one time I went with the Cataraqui Canoe Club, and we went in on Highway 7 at the start of the Salmon River. So the Salmon River, and it's just like a little waterfall. It comes out of a small lake, and then it goes all through the lakes and comes out at Tamworth and goes down through Roblin and through there. And sometimes the water is that deep, and sometimes the water is that deep. So we put in at number 7 highway, and we were paddling, and there was this one spot we had to get out, and it was a beautiful spot. But we had to get out of the canoes because it was too shallow, and it had some rapids. And I looked all around, and I said, "Oh, this is a perfect spot for something to write about." And I saved it for about 2 years, and I put it in this chapter I'm going to read to you about. And this place is on the Salmon River. Just probably 5 or 6, maybe less than 5 or 6 kilometers south of Highway 7. And then we had to get out and portage up this big cliff, and then over this old railroad track, and then down the other side, and then away. But it was just a gorgeous spot, and I said, I got to do something with that. So that's all part of writing. You write about, most everybody in here is about people I know. My son, he doesn't read a lot. He reads on the internet, and he was going to Syracuse one time on the train, and he phones me. He says, "I just realized that a Nookie is me." Because he's got the same birthmarks as I do. I said, "Well, finally you read the book." So, anyway, I love, putting characters that I know in it and putting them back to the 1300s. And the 2 gay women I have in the book are some gay women I know. They're strong, and so I can write about them and know how they react. And some of the warriors, one old guy I know, he's a crotchety old guy, so I put him into one of the warriors, and just that's the way he would be, just be like crotchety. And so at the end of that first book, that Panther Claw, you'll have to read, because he reappears later on. So I just want to make sure I got this. Got to find this, and then I have so many markings in here. I marked it the other day. Okay, I got it written there. And there's the marker. I'm not going to read you the whole chapter. It's a long chapter. I'm just going to start. As the boat neared the rocky shoreline, Magadewa Iwaguan swiftly jumped out from the front and pulled it ashore. The other 2 and Misco hastily made their exit, and just as I stood, my brother rocked the canoe and sent me backwards into the water. Initiate and Magadewa had big grins on their faces as both of them waded in, took my arms, and carried me to shore. This guy that's talking, his name is Jajagig, and that's elk, I think, in Anishinaabe. Coming up from the warm water, sputtering and spitting, I gasped, "What was that for?" "To wake you up from your days," Omashgosh replied. "And remember, I did tell you of my desire for retribution for your carelessness when switching paddling sides and splashing me. "Don't worry, friend, we'll look after you." Macadamia again said, "When we finish our meal, one of us will steer and you can sleep on the furs and we have in the canoe to get your rest." I pulled my arms away from them and kicked and splashed water, them driving both to shore, laughing and still teasing me. My brother approached and handed me a leather bag containing dried caribou. We can make tea and prepare the meal. And these guys have been coming trading. They've been trading with the Cree. They got some furs and they were trading dogs. That was the big thing. You'd trade dogs in that era. "The fire will dry you out," he then chuckled and continued to a clearing where everyone was gathering, wading into the crowd of boisterous people and barking dogs. I gathered a couple armfuls of dry wood and kindling, dug a fire pit, and threw both round and flat rocks into the hole. In a very short time, I had a good blaze going. When we were out in the open water, the biting insects had kept their distance. But while foraging for wood, I had stirred them up in an angry mass. They were now benefiting by feasting on my exposed skin. Unfastening my medicine bag, I tossed 2 or 3 handfuls of sage onto the fire, creating a smudge and deterrent to the bloodthirsty predators in the air. And I just want to pass this around. We have the 4 medicines. This is sage. I grow my own sage. This is sweetgrass, and we use that for smudging. My wife likes, she has a fire in the back, the sage and the mosquitoes stay right away. And cedar, there's no sense of passing the cedar around. And we make tea out of this and make tea out of sage. And I just gave some friend, he had a real bad cough, and I gave him some sage and it cleared it up within a day. So anyway, so then he kept asking for more. Now the flames were jumping and crackling. I laid the rest of the wood in a tight circle around the fire, butt ends facing in. This enabled me to push the wood into the fires a bit at a time without wasting it by pulling it on and burning it quickly, by piling it on and burning it quickly. So natives always, they didn't make a big bonfire. They take the sticks and they just kick it in as it burnt. They always figure it's a waste if you just pile it on top. Next, I needed to make tea. Walking to the canoe for the birch bark container we made tea in, I encountered Inishinib and Magadiwa Gwyn over a fire, warming pine resin on a rock they had heated in the fire. The resin would be smeared on the small tear in our canoe. They would put the heated pine gum on the rip with a stick with their thumbs and spread it. And once the resin cooled, the damage would be repaired. Now, if you didn't wet your thumb and you just put it on, you'd be carrying a canoe around for the rest of the day on the end of your thumb. Gathering up my tea box in another container, I filled them both with water and returned to my fire. I took the forked stick, stuck it in the fire, and retrieved my red-hot round rocks. Then I dropped the stones into the container to bring the water to a boil. Next, I filled the tea container to the brim with pine needles. Once the water was heated, I skimmed the scum off the top, and what was left was hot tea. To drink hot or cold liquids, each warrior and village resident carried a small clay cup for tea, water, and soup. Taking a chunk of meat, I cut it into thin slices with a clamshell, then approached the fire again and pulled out the flat stones I had put in the pit. After sitting these hot rocks on a bed of shore stones to prevent the heat loss, I lined up the thin slices of meat on them to fry. Taking the large container of water, I pulled some more heated stones from the fire and dropped them in. And while the water boiled, it was time to prepare my last meal item. Not having a corn grinder like the ones the women have in our village used, I made do with what my environment offered. Finding a large, flat rock, I set the corn on it and made cornmeal by pounding a fist-sized stone on the kernels. In no time at all, and after 7 or 8 handfuls of corn, there was a good supply of meal. Tossing this into a large container of water along with the thin slices of meat that had been fried, some chunks of fish that had been given to me by one of the young boys, and some leeks I had foraged in the forest, I now had a very tasty corn mush soup. While I prepared our meal, I watched as the others in the group laughed, told stories, and collected wood and roots from the forest. The 4 young boys were kept busy by running back and forth in the wooded area with armloads of dry firewood. Since wood was needed for the individual fires, people helped themselves from the communal pile the youngsters made. Ours was a culture of sharing. No one went hungry, cold, or in need of aid for anything. The community at large was there for all of us and to help everyone survive in times of need. During the meal, warriors went from one cooking fire to another to sample what their friends were eating. The two women by far had a larger gathering around their fire than the ones where a warrior was a cook. In my search for wood, I had found a forked tree branch the length of my arm and the size of my wrist around. This I put aside. Now taking 3 pieces of green sapling, I notched the ends of 2 of them and forced them into the ground on each side of the fire. I placed the 3rd piece lengthwise on the notches. Picking up some good chunks of a day called WIHS, caribou meat, I hung them from the spit to cook. The dripping fat juices from the meat on the spit caused the fire to sizzle and the flames to jump higher. The mingled aroma of wood smoke and cooking meat was overpowering as it flooded my sense of smell and clung to my hair and clothes. And glancing away from the flames, I realized that a very attentive crowd of 5 drooling dogs had been attracted to the scent wafting from the fire. I stood and whistled loudly, bringing my brother and our 2 canoe companions to the fire, along with a couple of cousins. No worries, there was lots of tea, mush soup, and meat for all, and the dogs would have to settle for the putrid fish heads tossed to them by the young boy who had been given the task of cleaning the day's catch. Everyone now cut off a piece of bark from an oak or elm tree to hold the hot meat they sliced from the spit. Each warrior also dipping his drinking vessel into the tea container and gulped down the hot liquid. With meat juice spilling out the corners of his mouth, my brother grinned and said, "Shashagi, you cook as good as any woman." And they quickly finished my tea, and I again filled the container, adding more heated stones. This time I used the foliage of a cedar tree to flavor the water. When they waited for the tea to boil, they dipped their drinking vessels into the heated corn mush and scooped it out with a cup with their fingers. And after finishing their mush, some wiped their hands on the grass, others on their pants or on the nearest dog within reach. Then they finished the new patch of tea. Very few words were spoken. Eating was a serious undertaking, completed with a few rounds of belching, farting, and the sudden rush to the nearest tree. I left the fire to find my tree, and then upon returning, doused the flames with water. We didn't need a forest fire following us down this small river. Once all the fires were completely put out, dogs and people were quick to step into their respective canoes and continue the journey. The river we were on was a connecting stream to a system of lakes that would take us to our villages another day or 2 away. There would be one small portage on this river, but it was steep going up and then coming down the other side. The river at this time of the year, of the Abi Tani Bino Gisus, the berry moon in July, was deep enough to paddle in most spots, but there were 2 areas where we'd have to get out, the portage being the second. The first place we'd have to get out was a short stretch of white water that wasn't deep enough to shoot through. We would have to walk in the water and guard our gimen canoe through the rocks. Paddling under the hot mid-afternoon sun, I faintly heard the sound of water rushing over rocks, telling us that we were close to where we'd have to get into the river and pull the boats. As the other 3 paddled, I steered the canoe toward the shore where all of us could easily exit and wade the river past this rocky hindrance. Mishko, that's his dog, swiftly stood on his haunches as we neared the shore, emitting a low, throaty growl, perking his ears. There was probably some sort of wild animal nearby that he had caught the scent of and was trying to identify. This part of the waterway wound through a thick forest that not even the sun's strong rays could penetrate. The warriors who had left their canoes for the shore to scout ahead and to guard the rest of us from any trouble were soon swallowed up by the darkness as they ventured in. Forgetting the dog's agitation, I stepped in the water to guide the boat through the shallow rapids. The river rocks were slippery, and I watched a few men lose their footing and fell into the bubbling froth. The 2 women and the youngest boy stayed in their respective canoes. Most of the dogs leaped in the river to follow their human companions. Misko stayed in the canoe, still growling. As I skirted the shoreline, the flies left to cover the woods and feasted on my bare skin. Skittering fish swam between my legs, with the odd one nibbling at my toes. Warriors were strung out all along the shores of the river. They waded to the spot in the stream where the water deepened enough to get back into the canoes. Here they all grouped together and waited for the boats as they came down single file. The forest seemed too quiet to me. All the birds and insects had stopped their racket. Then the shrill scream of a solitary Tishindis, blue jay, alerted the forest, setting off all the other birds and creatures, creating a deafening chorus. One of the warriors had been scouting ahead, slid down the embankment into the stream, reddening the water around him and the gathering canoes. At that same moment, as another canoe reached the closely knit cluster at the end of the rapids, I took my eye off where I was walking to watch as the body slid into the water among our canoes. In that instant, I slept. Misko let out a fierce bark, and I fell in the river, grasping the boat and simultaneously hearing what I thought was several sounds. Then there was an intense burning in the center of my left hand. An arrow had pinned my left hand to the canoe hull. I couldn't feel any pain, but neither could I remove my hand. Misko was now barking continually because of the screams of the women and the dead and dying warriors. I gazed up at the opposite shore and caught sight of a Natadawusu warrior with 2 black lines painted across his face and a red streak on his forehead. I knew this man. He was a sworn enemy of the Anishinaabe and as ruthless as they came. Otehihaka Minielk was his Natadawusu name, a warrior who wore many eagle feathers because of the Anishinaabe scalps he had taken. The Natadawusu were wading to the river, swinging their war axes, and meeting our warriors who had survived the initial onslaught of arrows in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. "Misko, stop your noise," I cried. "Lie down." The dog, startled by my raised voice, immediately obeyed and lay down in the boat with a thump. Turning my eyes to the opposite shore, I spotted where I could get to a landing, removed the arrow, and returned to help my people. As I approached the shore, a large rabbit was sitting there on his haunches and seemed to wave at me to come to him. I was starting to feel the effect of the arrow now, and I was racked with chills. Blood coursed down the side of the canoe, coloring both it and the water red. And when I clambered to the shore, I looked up under the eyes of a tall warrior. He reached down and grabbed me, pulling my canoe and myself to shore. Then he broke the arrow, releasing my hand. I gazed up and asked, "Who are you?" "Nanabujo." Then I blacked out. So, any questions? Yes?
What's the name of the second book?
Oh, second book is Algonquin Spring. Yeah, so they follow Brian read the last book and all the characters in the yeah, I suggested you read them, read I Am Algonquin Spring, and then they're a series. And some people die, new characters come in, so anyway. So I guess everybody will probably want to go catch the ferry, so.
Oh, there's another boat. There's always another boat. Rick, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For inviting us, and ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't read any of the series, you should read them in the very proper order, but I picked up the last one I happened upon at the bookstore, and I said, I've got to grab this one. The other 2 weren't there, so I grabbed it. Otherwise, I would have grabbed all 3.
If you're interested in buying it, I normally don't carry books with me, but I have all 3 books. They're $15 a piece, or if you want to buy the whole series, you can buy them for $40. So that's basically what you pay with tax. It's cheaper to buy all 3. But anyway, if you're interested, if you're not interested, that's fine. So anyway,
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. So if